So welcome to the Boyhood Farm. What do you think, you?
All set with recording it? Yeah. All right, fantastic. Yeah. So what are we looking at here?
So we're coming towards where President Carter lived from the time he was 4 years old until the time he was 17 and went off to college. And this is actually a Sears and Roebuck mail order house.
Really? He lived in a really, rural area. They had Sears and Roebuck's delivery out here?
So there's train tracks is right just the other side of the house. So the house would have come in on the train. President Carter, like I say, was 4 when they moved here. So the house was already here. His father traded their house in town for this house.
One here.
Yeah, and about 300 acres of farmland.
Mm-hmm. And when we're here, this was recently designated a National Historic Park, but first it was a
National Historic Site because we just had, we started out the park with just the depot. So we had the designation as a site. But since then we've acquired the high school, we've acquired the Boyhood Farm, and we actually have where the Carters live and the future site for where they'll be buried. So with all of those, then we put in to become a historical park.
Mm-hmm. So how did you come into this property?
So the Park Service had their eye on this site because we wanted to tell the story of President Carter's boyhood. So we were able to acquire the property and put the house back to, with President Carter's help, to as close to what it looked like when President Carter was a little boy as we possibly could.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. When you're walking around here, there's little buttons and voice things that he's telling the history of the house. What involvement did he have in helping the park?
So President Carter is kind of known as a micromanager, so he was very involved with this project, to putting, the site where the outhouse is. That's exactly where his memory of that outhouse is. And so we put back, of course the house is where it is, but we asked him, we sat down with him and had him go over exactly how big was his room. Because over the years, as you can imagine, walls had been knocked out and things had been changed, kitchens had been upgraded. So we put it back to the time when he was probably about around 8 years old, so the early to mid 30s.
Can we take a little look inside here?
Come on in. And as you mentioned, we have buttons. And this is President Carter's room. And you'll notice in every room in this house, except this one, there's a fireplace. Oh, yeah. So when President Carter was a little boy of 4 till 17, he didn't have any heat in this room. So it gets kind of cold in Georgia. It can get in the 20s or so. So this would have been a rather chilly room. But there's a button right over there, and we can let President Carter tell you a little bit about growing up.
You can make a little guest appearance.
When I was a boy, I was strongly influenced by my Uncle Tom Gordy, who served in the Navy, stationed in the Pacific on a ship. And he would often send me letters and souvenir gifts from China, Japan, the Philippines, other places that he visited. One of the presents he sent me was a small model of a Chinese junk or ship. Of course, that was one of my most cherished possessions. One of my fondest memories was a Christmas morning when I was a little boy. I had long wanted a pony and was discouraged from expecting it, but I woke up one Christmas, I was ill. I couldn't get out of the house because I had measles. And my mother and father said that maybe Santa Claus left me something outside in the yard. So I raised a window in this bedroom, looked out, and there was a pony. I have never been more excited in my life. And of course, then for years, I rode my pony, whom I call Lady. She had colts that I cherished, and it really was one of the transforming moments of my boyhood. As a boy, I was an avid reader, as was my mother. Whenever I was asked what I wanted for Christmas for Santa Claus to bring me, I always said books. Reading was really my major contact with the outside world. You know, what happened in Africa with Tarzan, what happened with Tom Swift and his adventures in scientific developments of those days. It was reading and the books that opened my eyes to the world that I didn't yet know as a boy. That reading habit stuck with me throughout my life, and that's one of the reasons that I still like to read and write books of my own.
Is there anything of significance about that piece there? I mean,
so, unfortunately, nothing in here is original from the Carter's actual boyhood farm. We put out a call when we were opening this house and redoing it for furniture. We sat down with President and Mrs. Carter, and President Carter told us what he recalled, and we have some photos of that time, so we were able to find furniture that was very close to what President Carter actually had in the day.
So it was, there was a gap between when he left and when it was acquired by the Park Service. What happened within that time?
So his father sold the property in, I think, the late 40s, and some folks bought it, and there was some remodeling done, and then the Park Service acquired the property and started the painstaking task of putting it back like it was.
So while he was president, someone else was living in this house? Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Different family?
Yeah, running the farm. And
bragging rights. I'd
Yeah.
brag about that. If I lived in the
Exactly.
president's house. Let's take a look over here. I love their little
bassinet. And
it's a nice blanket too.
so this was President Carter's parents, Miss Lillian and Mr. Earl's bedroom. So, and they had a fireplace.
Now his father was a farmer, and his what did his mother do?
So his mother was a nurse, and she was quite active and gone quite a bit. In fact, there's a table in here that the Carter children called Mom, because much of the time when they got home from school, their mother was gone. She was out helping somebody deliver a baby, or somebody was sick. So they would come here to Mom and look at what their chores were going to be for that day, because she had left a list and written it on this table, and they would come look at Mom and then carry out their chores.
And she worked at what was then the Wise Sanitarium, right?
That's correct.
When we spoke with Kim yesterday, she was talking about how now it's called the Lillian Carter Center. And when we spoke to them yesterday, she said that the Carter building had called her and asked if they could have her blessing to preserve the room that he was born in. And she was talking about how, she talked to them and yada, yada, yada. And when she hung up, she was very emotional about it. Is it something that you have people come here, especially in the most recent weeks, and they get very emotional talking about the president?
Oh, definitely. And we're very excited about the possibility of having the Wise Sanitarium room where President Carter was born, that possibly could be open to the public. So President Carter was the first president born in a hospital. So that makes it a pretty historic room. And the reason, it was very uncommon for people to be born in a hospital in 1924, but his mother was working there and she went into labor, and the doctor said, well, just, go get in a room and we'll deliver the baby here. So that's the only reason that President Carter was born in a hospital. Rosalind, who was born 3 years later, was born at home, as were most all people in that era. But back to your core question about people coming here now. We usually have pretty good crowds in the spring months. We have the snowbirds that are coming from the northern states going to the southern states, and they pass through and they like to stop by here. But we've had a real uptick this year because of President Carter's announcement about hospice. So, yeah, a lot of folks that were, of course, very sad to hear that news, and they want to learn more about President and Mrs. Carter, and they want to feel close to his roots. So they're coming by in pretty good numbers.
And it's free to come and visit the park here. It's free.
It's free.
But so it's not something that you guys make an active profit off of. You're funded by the government.
Yeah.
But as somebody who knows the president and the first lady, as you do, is it difficult to grapple with the idea that when someone you love isn't here anymore, attendance goes way up?
Yeah. You know, it's life. It's what happens, and I love any bit of attention, positive attention that President and Mrs. Carter can generate. You know, it's unfortunate that they're in hospice right now, or he is. But he's 98 years old. We all knew that this was an eventual day. And, we want to celebrate their life. And, who knows? With hospice, he is an amazing person. You can never, ever count him out. You may be back in 2 years refreshing this story, and we'll be talking about him still being in hospice or out of hospice. Who knows? But they're an amazing couple, and they have a will to live, and they want to live long to help as many people as they possibly can. And they're still doing that with the Carter Plains Foundation here in town. Is still working to help eradicate substandard housing in Plains. So, they haven't stopped.
Yeah, and when you were a governor, president, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, eradicated the guinea worm, and lived to be 98, I don't think anyone's going to say he had so much more left or anything like that. All he didn't do was colonize Mars, I guess.
Well, maybe.
Well,
there's still time.
There's still time. He could.
And the Carters have always eaten right, exercised every day, because they wanted to live as long as they possibly could to help as many people as they possibly could. So they're an amazing couple.
So there you go. I'd love to check out the commissary as well.
Okay, come on.
A little stroll. I won't make you play tennis with me.
I'd hate to whoop you out here.
You would.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty dark in here, but you guys are special. Let's go on in here and look around. So there's a button here if you'd like President Carter to tell you a little bit about the commissary.
We had a store, or what we called a commissary, on the farm, which was quite common in rural communities because they provided the basic necessities that had to be bought by the workers and by our family as well. What happened usually was that the purchases were on credit, and payment for the different items were made on payday, or sometimes even at the end of a season when the crops were harvested. The stores were convenient for 3 reasons. One, they were close by, and most of the transportation was on foot. Secondly, the landowner, the larger ones, owned the store and wanted to make a profit on items sold. And third, the people who lived on the farm or nearby quite often had no credit rating in town, whereas the landowner that owned the store would know them, and if they wanted to buy a pair of shoes or a shirt or some tobacco, they didn't have to worry about credit because they had ready credit, since the landowner knew them well, and since the landowner knew that when he paid them for their work, he could collect the bill. This store was not kept open all the time, but it was open all day Saturday because that was a day for major purchases. That was a day when the workers were paid and when they paid off what they owed. The rest of the week, the store was closed except when somebody wanted to make any kind of purchase. Both we and they were out of the fields during meal times. So almost every time I ever sat down at a meal, someone knocked on the back door and wanted to make a purchase from the store. My daddy would throw the keys across the table to me. I would get up and miss part of the meal, walk out to the store, unlock it, sell 5 cents worth of chewing tobacco or a bottle of castor oil or 2 pounds of sugar, make a ticket showing that the person had bought something on credit, lock the store back up, then go back to our meal. I hardly ever remember going through an entire meal without having to be interrupted to go to the store and open it to make a sale.
Still hear the resentment in his voice from having to
do that. That little machine over there with the barbs or whatever it is,
Yeah.
what on earth is that?
Any guesses as to what that might be?
Any guesses?
Any guesses?
If
There's
I
a
d- if I
wheel
guess
that
on camera,
turns.
people are going to be like, how did he think it was that?
You
So
can
let's
you can
say
edit it out.
it's, a
You
wheel
might
that
guess it
turns.
right. You know, there's
A
that
wheel that
possibility.
turns. Maybe it's something that pulled out.
Pulled out.
Oh, I don't know what it's called.
And maybe it pulled out seeds of cotton.
No,
No,
something to do with animals pulling out.
would it pull out like sort of muck from their hair or their wool or anything?
After you killed a certain animal, you would put it in the back.
It's for sausages or something.
Chickens.
Oh,
It's a chicken plucker.
Oh, so it would just take the feathers off it
Yeah.
with those barbs?
Uh-huh.
How so?
Put the chicken in the back and keep twirling it, and it would remove the feathers eventually.
Oh, there you go. And it'd probably tenderize it too. So that would
There
be
you
so-
go.
that wouldn't
Yeah,
be so
exactly.
bad. So yeah, we're in the commissary now, and we just heard President Carter talk about his childhood working here. Another interesting thing that I learned at the park about his childhood was that even though Plains is in the Deep South and was during a time of segregation,
Yeah.
it seemed like black and white children were very close with one another.
Yeah. President Carter's friends in his early days were all the black children that lived on the surrounding farms, so the tenant farmers. So we're going to go down to Rachel Clark's house, which she and her husband Jack, who was the farm manager, were some of President Carter's, he felt so close to them. They were almost like family to them. So yeah, growing up, President Carter really only knew his African American friends.
But when you get to the high school, there's talk about how it was only for white children.
Yes.
And black children didn't have the best opportunities themselves. Was this something that was difficult for him to see this discrepancy?
You know, I think when he was growing up, you didn't know because you've never encountered anything else. You didn't know how bad it was. And Chip Carter has been quoted as saying that, you know, you didn't know how bad it was until you left Plains and came back. And I think that happened to President Carter when he went off to the Navy and came back. But something happened when Jimmy was 14 years old that he and a bunch of his African American friends were running through a gate, and the other boys stopped and let Jimmy run through first. And he thought, oh, there's some trick. There's a tripwire. There's some reason. But then he later figured out that he had turned 14, and the other children's parents had told them, now you have to treat Jimmy differently. He's white, you're black, and you have to show him respect. So things changed. So he recognized that, of course. And he was saddened when they'd go to the theater, and his black friends would all have to go upstairs, and he got to go downstairs front and center. So, you know, you noticed it, but it was really, I think, when he returned home that he noticed the differences.
To completely just sort of change the subject in here,
Yeah.
there are so many wild and weird things in here, like a chicken plucker.
Yeah.
Is there something in here that really just fascinates you?
So, you know, it's kind of neat for me to see Carhartt. You know, today Carhartt's pretty, you know, a hip and what a lot of folks are wearing. But it was back in the day too, so that's kind of a neat thing. But you notice the lamps, the oil lamps, that's how they illuminated their homes. You have a feeder here to feed calves or pigs or babies. You have your churns for your milk.
It's a little hand churner too.
Yeah.
Not one of those big Amish ones.
Yeah.
Now, is anything in here original to the time as well, or was this also?
No. Now it's the same building. It's the same floor. You know. So, but the contents are new.
Are all new.
Yeah.
Well, new at least in the relative term.
Exactly. There are old, but they're new to this building.
Well, can we check out the horse stables and the woman's
Yeah,
house,
come
please?
on, let's go. And you see we're getting ready to put in the garden. Spring planting is upon us.
A lot of people know Jimmy Carter as the peanut guy. And when you go downtown, there's a little thing about where his farm was and where they would work with the peanuts. Did he ever grow any peanuts here?
Yeah, oh yeah, they grew peanuts, they grew corn, they grew sugar cane. We see the remnants of our sugar cane harvest last year. And we take the sugar cane, squeeze it, and make syrup that the Carters love to eat every year.
Oh, yeah.
The Carters also enjoy the yields of the gardens out here. So when the crops are ready, we take them to the Carter's house. And
So it's not just for show. I mean, you're still
No.
actively working the
we're
farm.
still actively working, and not only the Carters, but we donate the food to some of the underprivileged families in the community. Blacksmith shop. So on the Carter farm, they couldn't just go to the store. I mean, they had some things in their store, but if they needed something, the best, easiest, cheapest way was to make it themselves. So they had their blacksmith shop, and they would forge whatever tool or part that they would need to work on the farm to get things done.
Yeah, the last time we were here, they were doing a demonstration of it. How we would just make new
Yep.
horseshoes and
Yep, we have a blacksmith here at the park, Kevin Alexander, and he loves to get in there and crank things up and forge some tools.
It's fantastic. That's a pretty sound method of keeping your farm, running. Is just to make it a national park, I guess. That's kind of a good cheap method, but I guess if it works, it works.
And President Carter loves to come out here.
Yeah.
Over the years, he's done a lot of talks, a lot of interviews out here, and I think it's one of his favorite places to bring folks to show how he grew up.
How long has it been since he visited here?
He was here a few weeks ago. Yeah, he came out, drove around, made sure that it was looking good.
Make sure you aren't cutting any corners.
That's
or
right,
anything.
yeah.
Isn't that good? You have someone to keep you in check like that.
I love it.
Has he visited since he entered care?
Yeah, I think he's driven out here
He's so good.
since then, yeah.
So despite him, being in hospice care, he does still leave. Does he still leave the house? Does he still see people?
I really can't comment on much on that, but I do know he was out here just a few weeks ago driving around.
Oh,
so
good. There you go. So we are now at a lovely barn. And what's the situation here?
So this is original barn. As you can see, we've this past summer we did some repairs, and they kind of stick out like sore thumb. But this barn was original to President Carter's boyhood farm, and the mules hang out in here. We have a farm cat that's around here someplace, Bobo, and we have the harnesses for the mules. We hook our mules up when it comes time to plow. We'll hook the mules up, let them do the work. Over there you can see we have the sugarcane squeezing area, and we hook the mules up and they go round and round, and we squeeze the sugarcane, and on that little area over there is where we cook down the sugar cane.
So there's a devotion not only to preserving the legacy of the Carters, but preserving how they did things. I mean, there's
Definitely.
1,000 easier ways to do it, but that's not how they did it.
We do everything the way that President Carter and his father would have done it, and his mother, back in the 20s and 30s.
Fantastic. And it is, we mentioned earlier the railroad over here. There's a railroad right across the street, and I
Right.
know that now it brings in tourists, brings in visitors, but it was always there?
So that train tracks have been there ever since President Carter was a little boy. So it's the SAM line. It stands for Savannah, Americus, Montgomery. And the state created basically a state park on tracks, the SAM short line. So that excursion train brings people here about every 2 or 3 times a month. That we'll have a train load of 200-300 people that come out here and get to enjoy the farm.
And was it a stop back then? Would people stop on the train and be
So-
able to visit?
The Carters could stop the train. They put a little flag out, and the train would stop so they could jump on and head into Americas. Let's go on over to the Rachel Clark house, because I know President Carter would definitely want you guys to see this house and learn about his relationship with the Clarks. So Patty and Penny are our mules.
My most important question is who gets to decide the names?
Well, we bought them a couple years ago, and they were already named. They're 17 or 18 years old now. So this is the Clark house, and this is typical of a tenant house that would have been here when President Carter was a little boy.
Not touching the ground.
Yeah. No, they needed the airflow.
Yeah.
So, it gets very hot in South Georgia, so that helped the house stay cooler in the summer. So, I want to let President Carter tell you about this house, because nobody can do it as well as Jimmy.
In addition to my mother and father, there were a few people that shaped my life. 2 of them were Jack and Rachel Clark, who lived in this house. When my mother and father would go off on vacation, I would stay with Jack and Rachel. And they provided me with information about the basic rudiments of life, the priorities that any human being should accrue, and also my entree into understanding how the sharecroppers and day laborers lived in a strictly segregated society. Much later, I wrote a poem about Rachel Clark entitled Rachel. My young life, shaped by those I loved, felt the gentle touch of Rachel Clark, our neighbor on the farm, whose husband, Jack, cared for the barn and did the kind of work that we boys most admired. He tended mules and rang the cast iron bell that brought an end to sleep and later told the time to rest. His wife was small and quiet. Her brown skin fixed her in our segregated world, yet Rachel had the aura of a queen that somehow wouldn't let the white folks ask for her to do the chores around their place, like cooking, ironing clothes, or tending babes. But she would volunteer with quiet grace any time she learned the need was real. For miles around, the farming folks would know what Rachel did while working in the field. I'd pick 150 pounds or so of cotton if I never stopped to rest. No man could do much more, but Rachel Clark could pick near twice as much as second best. At sundown, we would tie what we had got in burlap sheets and watch the foreman weigh, see for ourselves that Rachel had the most, and if she had topped her own best mark that day. She'd put a lot more peanuts on the stacks, hoe more weeds, shuck more corn. No one, in fact, could equal anything she did. These kinds of deeds that may seem small to some were big events for us, in which we all competed as our farm life would allow. When work was done, or when a heavy rain made the fields too wet to hoe or plow, and open cotton bolls too damp to pick, sometimes she'd smile at me and mention fish. Then she and I would leave the farm and walk 6 miles or so to reach a stream she knew. These journeys gave us ample time to talk, or rather, I would listen to her words, and she would think a while and then hold forth about God's holy way, how when we deal with nature, we are stewards of the earth. She'd say that blessings bring on debts to pay, describe the duties of a man and wife, and say the brave and strongest need not fight. She'd tell how praying gave her life a lift, and how it made her act and not just talk, like staying up all night with someone sick. It wasn't empty preaching like in church. Sometimes I wasn't glad to reach the creek. Our bait was crawfish, lizards, crickets, worms, or whatever she would recommend for perch, catfish, and bass, which we called trout, misnamed by our European kin, or mine at least. I knew that Rachel's folks were brought themselves to be my people's slaves. The swamps and woodlands came alive for me. She taught the way that every person craves to learn. Our creels were empty flour sacks that kept our catch in water, fresh and safe, from water snakes and snapping turtles that would have left us bones instead of fish. Rachel used exactly 7 poles for reasons I could never figure out. I asked her, why not 8 or 6? She only smiled at me, then went ahead and caught, with luck or skill, 5 fish to 1 of mine. She made it seem a favor heading home if some of hers would wind up in my sack. Those might have been the best days I have known. With my folks gone, I'd stay with her and Jack. Newspapered walls all leaned. The sagging doors stayed open, letting flies and breezes in. I smelled the lye that cleaned the holy floors. Saving kerosene, we slept at dusk on lumpy corn shucks, not my feather bed. They always made me feel like I belonged and knew what things were better left unsaid. Although the food was plain and seldom changed, I never thought our big house down the road was better. They all knew I liked to be with Rachel Clark. I guess my feelings showed. In later years, I'd visit Rachel's home in public housing. Sometimes I'd find her on the village street, then still a queen, her apron sagging with a can of beer. She'd laugh about what good times there had been and tell me what she thought I ought to do in Washington, where I was working then.
So what could you tell me outside of what we just heard about the impact of the Clarks on the president's life?
You know, I think he saw the differences, especially, like I said before, when he came back. And he wanted to work to fix that. So first he started off with the school board and found out he wasn't really able to change much, being one single person on a board. So then he went to the Georgia Senate, and there was able to do a few things to help people, but then went to the governor's office, and that's when he was able to really effectively implement some changes, like his statement during his inaugural address that a time for racial inequality is over. So then he took it a step further and went to the presidency. And, Ambassador Andrew Young helped him reach out to other countries, poorer countries in Africa and South and Central America, and a wider impact. And then at the Carter Center, he didn't stop at the presidency. He went on to the Carter Center, where he was able to help eradicate and eliminate diseases like guinea worm, river blindness, and they're still to this day working to help everybody have a better life.
Where do you think, for him, Jimmy Carter the man, where do you think this drive to help people so much comes from?
I think a little bit from his mother, but I think he and Rosalind both were born with it. And, they're such a phenomenal couple. They feed off of each other in a fabulous way. They're very competitive, and, the competitiveness is at fishing and at helping people. Rosalind Carter's Institute for Caregiving, and then Rosalind's work with mental health, trying to take the stigma off of mental illness. They both strive to help as many people as they possibly can, and they've done a great job.
You said, not you, the president said something about how later in her life she was living in public housing.
Yes.
So she didn't always stay here.
No, they moved off the farm in the later years after President Carter was off at college in the Naval Academy. And her husband, Jack, passed away, and she moved into public housing.
There's a little sort of square here on the floor right next to the fireplace. I want to talk a little bit more about this property. So can we start here?
Sure.
Is it for wiping ashes out or something of that sort?
So that little square was where there was probably some rotten or burned out wood. So we replaced it so people could safely come in here. This house, like I said, is original, but it was left in disrepair for many, probably decades. So when the Park Service acquired it, with President Carter's help, we put it back to what it looked like when Jimmy was a little boy. The newspaper to try to keep some of the air from, because as you feel right now, it's pretty breezy in here.
It's nice.
And it would be great on a day like today, but as you can imagine, when it's 20 or 30 degrees out, it would not be good. So they had this fireplace here, and then they had a cooking stove in their kitchen area.
Can we take a look?
Sure.
In the kitchen? More fake
Go
food.
right ahead.
Yay.
More fake food. And there's the cook stove that they would have cooked all their meals on, their cast iron skillets.
All the grains and so on and so forth.
But as you could imagine, there's probably some mice that they struggled to keep out, and some bugs that they struggled to keep out.
There are a lot of holes.
There are a lot of holes in here.
Expected. How many people lived in this house?
So Jack and Rachel would have lived here by themselves. So, but a lot of the tenant farmers had, a number of children in a house this same size. So there would have been children sleeping in the bedrooms and the living rooms or wherever they could put their mat out.
And the house that we were talking about is now offices for the Park Service.
That's correct.
It's only just a stone's throw away. Were there several tenant houses like this?
There were several. Yeah. There were like 200 or 300 people, depending on the time, living in and around this archery area. It's a community of archery. There's a big church down the road that was an African American church, and there was a Bishop Johnson was down there. He had started a school a few years before the Carters moved out here. So it was a very prominent African American community, and the Carters were one of two white families that lived in this area. The Bacons lived down the road. But it was growing up for President Carter, other than school, his playmates were the African American children.
The bamboo.
Yep, the fishing poles that Rachel would have used to take fishing with little Jimmy.
Little strings on them. I feel like the fish might break them in half, but I don't know. I
They're
guess.
pretty strong,
Yeah.
yeah, bamboo. Pretty high tensile strength.
Have to ask, since I'll probably never talk to a superintendent of Jimmy Carter Park again, if they could tell us anything about Jimmy Carter being attacked by a rabbit.
So
Boat.
that very famous story,
That's
and that
right.
was out at the Pond House, which is really just over the hill here, about a mile by the way the crow flies. So President Carter was out there fishing, and typically rabbits, you don't see them swimming. They can swim, and if you go to Google, you'll see videos of rabbits swimming. So it does happen, but usually it's a sign that they may be sick or something, and So President Carter was out fishing, and this rabbit started coming towards the boat swimming, which is the only time that President Carter had ever seen a rabbit swimming. So when he got back to the White House, I believe it was one of his press people mentioned it in a press conference, and for whatever reason, slow news day or whatever, it went viral.
Yeah.
For the time, if things could go viral back in the 70s without personal computers in your hands.
But he was not like Monty Python attacked by a rabbit. by any
He
means.
was no,
that is
no.
untrue.
There was no blood. No,
blood or anything
Yeah,
like that.
the rabbit lived to swim another day.
Will the Park Service one day acquire the famous rabbit swimming hole site? Or?
No, that belongs to the Carter family,
Yeah.
and they enjoy it to this day.
There you go. You could put a remote control rabbit in the water.
There you go. That might be
People swimming
something to
around.
do. Yeah. There's a lot of family members, Carter family members that was here. Of course, all of President and Mrs. Carter's boys helped. Jeff, Jack, and Chip were on the job here, plus a lot of the local people. They loved President Carter, or Governor Carter at that time, and they knew that he would make a great president, so they worked to get him elected.
And we got some chairs here too. Is there a story behind these?
Yeah, so Mrs. Carter's mother, Miss Allie Smith, and President Carter's mother, Miss Lillian Carter, used to sit out here and greet the tourists that would come up and visit and shake hands and tell stories about their children.
So it was very much a hometown effort, the
Everybody.
presidency.
Yeah, the Peanut Brigade was created, so many of the residents of Plains were members of that. So they would travel all over the country and help get the man that they knew and loved elected as president.
Is there anything particularly historic that happened in this room right here? Because I know the other room has a historic phone call in there.
Sure. The thought that a campaign for president could originate in this building, it was the oldest building in Plains, and they didn't change much. They just moved in and moved their desks in, opened the doors up, and just the other day, Wolf Blitzer from CNN was here interviewing Chip Carter. So it's, it gets a lot of attention from the media people that come to town, and pretty much every tourist that comes to Plains comes through here as well.
And it was, as you said, the first part of the national park for the Carters. How did it come into NPS possession?
So it was owned by the railroad. So the City of Plains started the process of going to Congress and getting it designated as a historic site. So then they raised money, and then it passed through Congress that this would be the Jimmy Carter National Historic Site. We're so fortunate. The 70s were a time where, not like today, but there were a lot of photographs taken. So we have a lot of the original photographs taken of the building during the day. So we've tried to recreate with the photographs and of course with President and Mrs. Carter's assistance. And we're working on doing even more in this building. It needs a little updating.
I think it's just right. Personally.
Thank you.
In a building like this, you really get a feel of the sort of hometown angle, that you described earlier, how it took the whole town to bring it together and make him governor and then president. And that was way back when. When it came to 2020, when it came to the pandemic and so on and so forth, how did the NPS get ready for sort of small sites like this to be ready to house people?
Yeah. So, it was something new for a lot of us. We hadn't been through a pandemic before. So, we followed the government orders to shut down things. For many days I was fortunate I could go to work. I could go over to the high school all by myself and be in the big building and get some things done. But, we didn't have visitors for really a couple years. And it was hard on us because we had just opened a new exhibit. We had totally redone the high school with new exhibits that we'd been working on for about a decade. And we opened them up President's Day, which is in February. And we shut everything down in March. So, we had this great new facility we were very proud of and couldn't show it to anybody for 2 years. But we got by. This area was hit very hard with the pandemic. Albany, Georgia, just south of here, about 45 minutes, was one of the highest spread counties in the world at one point. Yeah, there were a couple funerals down there that some people that had been traveling outside of the country came and spread it all over this area. So initially, we were very hard hit. So, we were very, very worried, and especially with being around the Carters. I'm around the Carters all the time, and so I didn't want to be that person that brought the plague to the Carters. Yeah. So, very cautious with mask wearing, and I was very happy when the vaccine came out and, wanted to be standing in line as soon as I could qualify for it. So, it was an interesting time, and luckily the Carters, to our knowledge, never got COVID, at least as of yet. So, knock on wood. And I haven't either, so fortunate. Yeah.
Well, I'd love to take a little stroll downtown with you, please. The whole length of the town.
It's going to take, 5-10 minutes? So Plains really hasn't changed all that much from the days when President Carter was a little boy. We've been fortunate that we get to, all the storefronts are occupied now. So business is good, tourism is good. The park brings about 60 or 70,000 people per year to come look at Plains, and they love to come down and stay in the Plains Historic Inn, eat some peanut butter ice cream, drink some coffee, shop for some antiques.
Yeah.
So it's a very vibrant community. We have a great friends group, as I've mentioned before, that keep the town looking good. We keep all the flowers here. We have a sister city. So, a lot going on. And, just a few weeks ago, again, President and Mrs. Carter were down here. They love to check in with the shop owners and see what's going on. They love economic development. So there have always been a vibrant part of this community. I mean, even, in the last few years, they would get out pretty much every day that they were in town and walk around. So it was not uncommon at all to run into the Carters when you were in getting some peanut butter ice cream.
Yeah. If you were to paint a picture of the town of Plains, with or without the Carters, I mean, what would
Yeah.
you say about the town?
So it's very close knit. Both, I think the African American community and the white community, we all care about downtown. We care about the Carters, and we're very proud of having a town that is vibrant. Many places in rural areas, there's brain drain, and the younger people go off to college and don't come back. But we've been very good at getting people to come back, and it's nice that we can all work together. It's maybe a little rare these days.
You mentioned as well that the president and his wife will be here all the time. What impact have the Carters had on the town of Plains?
Well, they, even in their death, they care about economic development, because they chose about 20 years or so ago to be buried here in Plains, just about a half mile up the road, right across the street from their home. That they built in 1961, and they still live in that same home. But they knew that if they were laid to rest here, that there'd be tourists that come. There's quite a group of people that love to go to see presidents' burial sites. So they knew that, so they chose to be buried here. So they care, even in death, they care about City of Plains and their home. They were thinking about their community, the economic development of the area. So most presidents today are buried at their libraries. But the Carters in the early 2000s announced that they would be buried here in Plains. So, even in their passing, they're thinking about the well-being of the town.
And now you are a friend of the Carter family, and
Yes.
you're also the superintendent of the park, which means that you would be quite responsible and quite involved in the process of that. Is it like saying goodbye to a family member? I mean, is it like planning for their, leaving?
So a president's funeral is planned the day after a president is elected president.
Oh, really?
So, over 40 years ago, they started working on President Carter's demise. And, I guess probably 10 years from now, we may be working on the same plan, tweaking it and updating it. So we'll see.
As somebody who is his friend, is it weird to think about that that you'll one day be supervising his grave?
It is. It's eventuality for all of us. And, the Carters have lived such a full and good life. They have no regrets about the life that they have lived. They have worked every second to help others. So we can all take solace in that. And when the time comes, the time will come. Don't know if I'll be around to see it. We'll see.
So in that, sort of off of that, where do you see Plains looking like in the next few years?
We have looked at other presidential sites, like LBJ, for example. When LBJ died a number of years before Lady Bird died, but when she passed, they converted the house into a park. And they're actually buried on site at the farm, or the ranch at LBJ. So we have looked at that, and the numbers greatly increased for, especially, it takes a while for the Park Service to convert a house into a museum, and that's literally what we have to do. So it's a cumbersome process and a lot of planning that we have already done some of, but we have got the plans in place that we've had in place for for a few decades. And it'll take probably about 3 years to implement those plans, and then we'll open up the house, and the grave site should be opened up well before that time. So at LBJ, the numbers greatly increase. So we anticipate that our numbers will probably double shortly after the president passes.
As well, a boom in tourism. Has there been a boom in tourism since the announcement of his hospice care?
There has. The other day at the park we had nearly 300 visitors, and so that's about 3 or 4 times more than maybe typical. Yeah.
And I suppose since we're at the backdrop of it here, I have to ask about peanuts and planes.
Yeah.
Forget the president for a moment here. Peanuts are a very important part of the town here.
They're a vital
everywhere.
part.
Can you tell me anything about the peanut and planes?
So we're very fortunate. We have a thriving peanut industry. This is a shelling facility, and they process peanuts for seed and for various things, and employ quite a few people here in Plains. You know, oftentimes on my way to work, I get stopped by peanut trailers. That's the traffic jam in Plains is the peanut trailers. So, and you can purchase right over here at Plain Peanuts, you can purchase every kind of peanut about known to man. Boiled peanuts, fried peanuts, chocolate covered peanuts, peanut brittle, peanut butter. So I spend a lot of time in there. Peanut butter ice cream. Because I love peanuts. I eat peanuts every day.
Yeah.
Every evening I sit and shell out a handful of peanuts before I go to bed.
There you go. I think there's something in the clay and in the peanuts that keeps the people of Plains just eternally young, or something like that.
It's working for a lot of people. Yeah, you wouldn't guess I'm 102.
I know. I wouldn't. At least if I did, I wouldn't say it out loud.
Thank you.
I wouldn't get decked by a park ranger. So looking at the strip here, it really looks honestly like it hasn't much changed since that little photo infographic over there. How long have you lived in Plains?
So I arrived Plains in 1998. My work has taken me to various other places, Washington, Savannah, Atlanta, but every weekend I come home to Plains. So I love a small town. I was born and raised in a small town in Ohio, so I feel right at home here.
And has it changed in a considerable way you've seen in that time?
It hasn't really changed. You know, there's some businesses that come and go, but pretty much it looks just like it did, you know, when I hit town. Yeah.
I know this isn't part of the National Park Service, but I may as well ask. I do love the smiling peanut.
Yeah.
The Evansville
President
one.
Carter hates the smiling peanut.
Really?
He wish it would go away. Yeah.
What's the story there now? I gotta know.
You know, he doesn't like the fact that they put his mouth and teeth on a nut.
Huge peanut.
Yeah, on a huge peanut. So he doesn't like it at all. But
how did it end up here then? I mean, it was from Indiana, right?
Yeah. So when during the campaign, it was originally in front of the depot. So they had donated, so he got to see it. Of course, back in those days, he was on the road most of the time. But in the last decade, since he came home from the presidency, they moved it over to front of a gas station, and it's in between his home and his church. So he had to drive by it at least every Sunday. And if he went to church on Sunday night, which they usually did, he got to see it twice.
I know it was hit by a car as well. Is that a conspiracy theory that he planted the car to destroy the peanut?
You know, I am not going to confirm or deny that theory.
There is another theory surrounding the peanut, and this it may have some truth to it, that there was a hole cut in the back of it, for assassins or something like that.
I have never heard that one.
All right. There's an urban legend that there was a hole in the back of it that's been covered up that was used, and the Secret Service cut it to make sure there were no assassins or anything inside.
That's probably a true story. I've never heard that, but you know, they need to check those things out.
There you go.
The Carter Protective Detail is thorough.
Yeah, when it becomes part of the national park one day and it's put on top of the high school, it'll be one of the things you have to check.
Yeah, I don't think I'll be around then.
Yeah, maybe. All right, well, thank you very much,
All right,
Ms. Stuckey,
thanks for
taking us
coming
on
to
the tour
Plains.
today.
We
And,
appreciate it.
Yay, Plains.
Yeah,
yay.
come see the
Fill
park.
battery. There you go.
Perfect.